everyone, and welcome to Auntie Tay's channel. Today I'm going to show you how to assemble a bunch of American Girl doll clothes and accessories. All that can be found on the Auntie Tay membership website. It's going to be so much fun, and if you love American Girl dolls and you love crafting, you're not going to want to miss this tutorial. So let's get sewing. Hey everyone, it's Sam from the Auntie Tay team, and you're watching The Sam Show. Let's go make some fun things. Let's start off with every girl's best friend, her scrunchie. With the scrunchie pattern already cut out on the fabric, I'm going to measure 5 inches on the elastic, and I'm using the Marvy fabric marker for dark colors. I'm measuring it at 5 inches and I'm not cutting it yet because if you wait to cut the elastic till the end, it's a lot easier. Now you can't see the mark right away, but if you wait a little bit, it'll start showing up after time, and then it erases with water. I'm going to fold my fabric the long way and sew together the short sides, making sure that right sides are together. Unless I state otherwise, all of the patterns are using a 1/4 inch seam allowance. So anytime you're sewing with these patterns, just know it's a 1/4 inch seam allowance and make sure you just sew appropriately. And I just do a single stitch. Make sure you do a back stitch at the beginning and end of the row so that you keep your stitches in. But besides that, it's a basic stitch. And with your iron, you are going to take that seam and press it open. Now I'm going to teach you guys how I do the burrito roll. This is the method that they call for this type of scrunchie. There's a bunch of different ways you can sew scrunchies together. I just personally think this is the easiest way. So I press that seam together and then I put it towards the back. Now with only taking the top part, you want to roll it together on itself as close as possible and then fold the back part in half on top of itself. Hopefully that'll make a little bit more sense when I show you how to sew it. You're going to do a 1/4 inch seam allowance or as close as you feel comfortable getting to the edge of the fabric. Do a back stitch to make sure your stitches don't come out, and then sew a straight line. When you get towards the end, you are going to pull the center out, and I found it's the easiest to pull it if you hold on the back and then pull into the front. And this is how it's a burrito. So it's half of it is inside and the other half is wrapped around it. You'll keep straightening out and pulling until you get towards the other end. Because these scrunchies are really small, this method is a little bit harder, but once you get it down, it's so easy and it creates such a nice scrunchie. So keep pulling the inner part, making sure your needle is down. Don't pull it if your needle isn't down and you'll pull it out of your machine. You also want to make sure that the fabric in the middle is not getting stuck under your stitches. It won't create a continual loop if you sewed it together. It can be kind of difficult because of how small this is, but I promise the end makes it so worth it. So keep pulling and sewing slowly, making sure that everything's where it's supposed to be, and you'll see at the very end that you'll see your strings from when you started, and you'll know to only give yourself about an inch opening from where you started. Now you can see that mark on our elastic where the 5 inches is. I'm going to take a safety pin and loosely tie it. You just want to be able to easily untie it, but not loose enough that it comes out. And then you're not going to put it through the whole where you think you're going to turn it inside out, you're going to put it through the bottom where it goes straight through to the other side. It's very trippy at first, I promise, but you'll love how it turns out. Then once you have both ends securely, you can undo your safety pin and then cut your elastic. It makes it so much easier than trying to hold on to a little bitty piece of string. And then you're just going to knot it together, kind of like you would tie a water balloon or a regular balloon. You just loop it around itself and tie it really tight. You don't want it to come loose, and make sure to leave a little bit of tail at the end, just in case it does slip down. So make a knot just like that, make sure it's tight, and now we are going to flip it. This is where that little hole that you left an opening, you're going to start pulling out the center, and it's really satisfying. You'll just flip it around and then you have your scrunchie. Now to close that hole that you pulled it right side out, you can hand sew it, you can hot glue it, or use your favorite fabric glue. Or what I do is I just take it back to my machine and do a little top stitch on it. And the edges might stick out, just push them in a little bit, and if you want you can iron it to help keep them down. But I'm just going to take it to my machine and do a quick top stitch, and then your scrunchie's all done, guys. Next, let's make this super cute pajama set, so the bottoms and the top. Starting with the pants, you're going to want to put right sides together, and the part that has a deeper cut is the back, and the part that has less of a severe cut in the front is the front. We are going to pin and sew the front part of the pants. If you have a serger, you can use a serger. I only have a sewing machine, so I'm just going to use a single stitch, and make sure you back stitch to secure your stitches, but I'm just going to do a single stitch around that front seam. Just be careful to go slow and with the curve, keeping the same seam allowance the entire way. You're then going to want to cut triangles along that seam so that it doesn't gather when you turn it right side out later on. Then we are going to hem the bottom of the pants. You are just going to fold it up 1/4 of an inch and then fold it up again one more time at 1/4 of an inch on each leg. All you're going to do is a straight stitch along the top, just like you normally hem pants, except they're just little mini pants. Just make sure you do it for each of the legs, and that's what for the waistband, you're going to iron it down at 1/4 of an inch, and then it's going to be 3/4 of an inch. So total it would be 1 whole inch, but you're going to do this so it creates that nice edge along the bottom. And then I'm going to use a ruler to make sure that I have it the 3/4 of an inch all the way along the top, and then I'm going to iron it and pin it. You're then going to want to sew along that bottom edge where you just creased it, and get it pretty close to the edge, leaving a tube through the center because that is where you're going to put your elastic for the waistband. Taking 1/2 inch braided elastic, you are going to measure out using your washable pen 10.5 inches. And then using a safety pin on the end to help get it through the tube, you're just going to insert it into the pants. You're going to want it to stick out the end just a little bit, but don't cut the elastic yet. Now, using a zigzag stitch, it doesn't really matter which zigzag stitch you use, but just a zigzag, you're going to want to go back and forth over top of the elastic onto the fabric. This is going to secure where it is. Then you're going to look for that mark you were looking for and pull it slightly out of the pants as well so you can see it, and sew that with a zigzag stitch as well. And then you can cut it. This way you don't have to worry about the elastic going into the pants and fighting it back and forth. So that's my favorite tip for using elastic. Then with right sides together, you're going to line up that back seam. You're going to iron it, pin it, and sew that back seam together, making sure that you are using a straight stitch again. I know it's easy to forget when you go back and forth. Unless you're using a serger, then keep using the serger. You're just going to want to follow the curve of the pattern like you normally would, and then you have the front and the back of your pants finished. You're going to make sure that you do some triangle cuts in the seam without getting any of the stitches. And then all you want to do is divide each leg up into its own leg and pin it together. You'll then just straight stitch this together. To get the seams to line up perfectly, I match them in the middle and then make sure the end of the legs match, and I pin one leg at a time. Like I said, I just did a straight stitch, so I'm just trimming now all the corners, and you're going to want to triangle cut the middle as well after you sewed it. I just didn't show it in the video. And then your pants are done. You can turn them right side out, and there you have your little pajama pants for your little slumber party. Next on the list, we have this super cute PJ shirt. You're going to take one of the front panels and the rounded curve piece and sew it on the short side of the shirt. If you have a serger or a sewing machine that does zigzag stitches, it is recommended to serger zigzag. My machine does not like doing zigzag stitches, so I'm only going to be doing straight stitches unless I otherwise say, but just know if you want a little nicer finish to use a serger or a zigzag stitch. Now you are going to take the other front panel and line up the other edge of the curved piece and sew that piece together. Once you have that piece stitched together, you are going to take the back panel and match it right sides together with one of the front panels. You'll pin it and sew it, and then you'll do the same thing on the opposite side with the other front panel and the other part of the back piece. It will create a full loop around. Now that all the panels of the shirt have been sewn together, along with the collar, it is time to press the seams open. This will just help everything lay much flatter in the end. This next step is optional. Along the top part there, where the two front panels and the neck collar kind of line up, I'm just going to do a single top stitch. This is completely optional. You don't have to do this step if you don't want to. Next is the little collar. So we're going to fold it on itself the long way, the hot dog way, and iron it down. Now you're going to want to sew along the short sides of this. This is going to create the points of your collar. And then I just chain stitched them together to save on thread. So you can do that if you want, you don't have to. You're going to want to cut the corners off of those collars so that they make sharp points when you flip it right side out. And then to get my points to stick out, I just use my scissors because they have like a rounded head on them. They're not sharp and pointy, so they're not going to poke all the way through. But then I just use my scissors and push them out and iron it flat so you have some nice crisp points for your collar. Using a fabric marker, you're going to want to find the center of the back panel and then put a mark there, and then a mark along the center of that curved piece that are in between the two front panels. I just fold it in half, lining the seams up, and then I mark the center. And make sure you're using a marker that's going to wash away when you wash it, or it will fade over time. Then you're going to take the center of the collar that we just made and line it up to the center of the back panel that you already marked. Pin it right sides together and with the open seam facing the raw edge of the shirt, and pin it. I start by pinning it in the middle and then working my way around. It is curved, so it's a little bit more complicated. Just go slow and you'll be able to get it all the way around. This part can get a little tricky, so just go slow. All I do is go one pin at a time, trying not to pull, but also trying not to get any of the fabric to overlap on itself. As long as you go slow, one pin at a time, and moving your fabric around underneath so that there aren't any parts that are getting folded on top of each other, it'll work out perfectly fine. This is a little bit more advanced for the sewing, but it's definitely doable, and believe me, once you do it once, you will be so proud of yourself and you'll realize it's not as bad as you thought. So just slowly work every little pin going across, because you don't want it to move off center, because then your collar will be off. Next, we are going to take that curved piece and fold it right side over onto the collar, onto the part that we just sewed. This is where you want to find that mark of the center of the collar and the center of that piece that you marked as well. You're going to then pin it and pin it all the way around slowly, because once again, it's a curve. It's going to be a little bit more complicated, but you're going to make sure all the raw edges are lined up along each other, so when you sew, they will all be facing the same way. And then when you have the collar all pinned, you're going to want to iron down the front panels. This is just going to give a nice finished front of where you're going to be able to put your buttons on the front and then your Velcro on the inside of it. So just pin those and you're going to sew all of that curve. You're going to want to move slow with this too. There are a lot of layers of fabric, and you want to make sure that you're getting that top collar part, then the pointed collar, and then the back panel all together. You don't want to miss any of the layers. Now you're going to work all of your seams out. You're going to see that you have your little collar sandwiched in there, and the part that we just ironed down, you're going to poke those out right sides out and iron those down. That's going to make part of the collar going towards the buttons. And then I like to iron the collar and along that seam just to really get it all the way out there. And the inside lining, I like to iron that down. You're now going to do a top stitch along that lining just underneath where the collar meets the shirt. This top stitch is just going to help so the lining on the inside of the shirt stays down. With this part, you just want to make sure you're not getting any of the fabric bunched because they're both trying to curl opposite ways. It's really easy to get a wrinkle in there. So just go slow, pull out your pins and adjust your fabric per usual so you get this really nice top stitch on your shirt. Time for the sleeves. So you're going to fold it 1/4 of an inch, iron it down, and then fold it again another 1/4 of an inch to create a hemline, and then you're just going to top stitch that for each arm. Once the arms are done, you're going to want to change your stitch length to as long as possible, and then this is where you're going to want to do a straight stitch no matter what you're doing. This is going to help gather the arm for when you are doing the sleeve. So approximately 3/4 of an inch away, you're going to slowly go around the curve of each sleeve using a long stitch and without back stitching at the beginning or the end, so that way you can pull and gather the thread to gather the sleeve. Then you're going to take your parts you already sewed, find the center of the sleeve and match it to that inner seam that you have flattened. From there, you're going to pin it in the middle and then follow the curve of the sleeve to pin it along the shirt. Now, it might be a little complicated to match them up. This is where you're going to pull on those strings to help gather them just a little bit on each side. You're going to want to try to do it equally on each side of the center. Before you forget, put your stitch length back to the normal setting, and then you're just going to stitch the sleeve onto the shirt. Just going slowly and pulling your pins out as you go. Now with your sleeves attached, you can pull out that gather stitch. Sometimes you can pull it out, other times you'll have to get a seam ripper and cut out the stitches, but if you want, you can keep it. For looks wise, I like to take it out. Now with pieces right sides together, you're going to roll the sleeves on themselves and match the front panel to the back panel. I like to take the arm sleeve, like the armpit seam, match that up, and then pin on each end from there, and then fill in with pins as I feel fit. Sometimes I like a lot of pins and sometimes I don't. It really depends on if I feel like the fabric is cooperating or not. So same thing on the other side is I take the pin, put it in the armpit seam, and pin it along the edge. Then you're just going to sew along those edges to get your shirt. This part's pretty easy. The only trick I have is when you get to that armpit seam is when the needle is down, then turn your work and pivot it that way. It just gives you a nice line. Make sure you trim the armpit seams, doing triangle cuts in them so that they're movable. Once you are done with that, you're going to put everything right side out. You're gonna make sure that those side panels are flat where they should be, and then you're going to measure up 1/4 inch and then fold it and iron it again another 1/4 inch to hem the bottom part of the shirt. I'm not going to sew this on camera, it's just a top stitch along the bottom, and then you're going to want to figure out where you're going to put the Velcro. It'll be about 2 inches from the top is where you're going to put the Velcro along the panel on the bottom. Now, when you're doing Velcro, just go slow and be careful not to jam your needle on your machine or get your threads stuck. Just take it nice and slow. And you're going to sew an inner rectangle around the Velcro. Now make sure that when you line your Velcro up, that one piece is facing forward and is on the front of the shirt, and the other is on the opposite side facing inwards so that they stick together. I know from experience for not double checking this, and then you have to undo your stitches. I then like to iron the little corners of the collar down in the front. It just finishes it off. And then because I didn't use zigzag stitches, I'm just using Fray Check, so it's not going to fray crazy over time. But you don't have to do this. This is optional, or you might not have had to. And then this part is completely optional too. I had these really cute little buttons, and I hand sewed them onto the top part of where the buttons would go, but you know, where the Velcro is. And I just did 4 of them, and I marked them where I wanted them to go, and then I just hand stitched them on. It wasn't anything too fancy, but I think it really made a big difference, and it just elevated this look that much farther. And even though I did sew them on, I did do a little dab of glue. But if you guys can finish this, the rest of the projects are a breeze, I promise. Every slumber party has to have an eye mask, so that's what we're going to be making next. So you're going to need your pieces, and you're going to need your elastic, and if you don't like your boring elastic, don't worry, you can sublimate it, and Auntie Tay has some awesome sublimation patterns for ribbon that work awesome for this elastic. Now I like to use felt for the back piece. It gives it kind of a stiffer feel and finish, and a little bit fluffier eye mask for our lovely dolls. So I'm going to put right sides together, and I'm going to pin the elastic on each side of the mask first, and then go around and pin it all down, leaving a little bit of an opening at the top. If you're worried about forgetting when to stop and leave an opening at the top, you can just mark it with one of your fabric markers. Then you're just going to sew with about a 1/4 inch seam allowance around the whole edge. Curves can be a little bit harder, so just go slow, taking your pins out one at a time. But all you have to do is go all the way around sewing. And I do like to backstitch over top of the elastic, just so I know it's not going to rip out. But that's a preference thing. If you feel like you don't have to, then don't worry about doing it. And then you're going to stop at that opening so you have enough to flip it right side out. Before we flip it though, you're going to want to cut slits around the whole mask, trying not to get any of the stitches, but you're going to do triangles along the outer edge and then just slits around the nose. This is just so it lays flat when you turn it right side out. Then just flip it around, get it right side out. I use scissors to push the seams out, and then I iron it flat and making sure that little lip is tucked in. And then I like to do a top stitch. You can just glue the top closed or just do a top stitch along that part, but I like to do a top stitch along the whole mask. I just think it really elevates the look and makes it look a little more finished. So that's completely up to you, and it's all done. Our next project we are going to make is this super cute neck pillow. We are going to take 2 of the same pieces and lay them right sides together. Then you're going to want to mark about 1.5 inches, maybe 2 inches opening at the top where you do not want to sew. You're going to leave that open so we can flip it later on, and just pin along the outside. You're going to do a 1/4 inch seam allowance around the edge and moving slowly around those curves and removing those pins. If it's hard to go around the curves when your needle is down, then slowly move your fabric underneath. When you're done sewing, you're going to cut little triangles around those curves and little notches so it lays flat when we flip it around. And then we are going to turn it right side out. I just use my scissors to flip it, and then you're going to get some polyfill and stuff it. You can stuff it as much as you want. Neck pillows are normally firmer, so I normally add a decent amount to it, but it's your neck pillow. You can make it as fluffy as you want. All that's left to do is stitch it closed. I personally like to hand stitch it. I just think it looks the best with hand stitching. It takes a little bit of time, but it's not too horrible, and I just try to hide my stitches in between the seams along the edge, and that's it. It's a super cute, fun project. I'm really excited to make this super comfy, cozy robe. It's going to be perfect for the little slumber party. With any 1/4 inch or smaller thickness ribbon, you're going to cut 2 pieces to be 3 inches, and about 1 inch under the armhole on the back panel, you're going to mark it, and you're going to loop right sides outwards. So wrong sides together on the right side of the back panel. And then you're going to sew that on with your sewing machine. These are just going to make the little loops on the robe for where the drawstring goes around it. Then you'll want to take each of the front panels and make sure to line up the shoulder seam on each side. Right sides together. I know it's kind of hard to tell on this fabric, but right sides are together. Pin the shoulder seams together, and you're going to sew them. Once you have the shoulder seams all sewn together and cut apart, then you're going to hem the inner edge of the jacket or the robe part. I ironed it and pinned it down. And then I used a zigzag stitch to complete it, only because it just helps it from fraying a little bit. So you'll sew that up, and then we're going to move to the hood. So this is where this gets really fun, where you can play around with the pattern and change how you want to do it. You're going to have a inner fabric of the hood and an outside fabric. Both of them are cut the same size, so you can decide if you want them to be the same. You can decide if you want them different. It's completely up to you. Just know that the one that you are sewing for the outside will have a 1/4 inch seam allowance, and then the one that you're sewing for the inside of the hood, it's going to have a 1/2 inch seam allowance. I picked the blue for the outside of the hood, so that has a 1/4 inch seam allowance, and then the Olaf is the inside of the hood, so I did about a 1/2 inch seam allowance. It just has to be smaller than the outside. Then taking your long strip, you're going to put right sides together with the inside of the hood and pin it and sew it, and you're going to do right sides together of the outside of the hood. This is creating a band that goes around the hood on the robe. So you can see I sewed it on the lining, and now I'm going to match it right sides together, which was kind of confusing. So right sides together for the hood, and you're just gonna sew it along that rounded edge in the front to create that band. So then you'll see it looks like this. The bottom is open, but they are sewed together in the middle. You're going to then tuck the band in between the two hoods and sandwich it down, so it'll be like folded in half in between the two hoods, and you're going to pin that and then sew that down along that hooped top edge. And I'm going to be using a zigzag stitch again, so I'm going to switch it to C. And then I'm just sewing along that edge, kind of where I already sewed them together, but now it's going to sandwich that little band around the hood. You'll see it. It's a really cute added touch to it. So then the Olaf goes on the inside of my hood, and the blue goes on the outside, and then there's a little Olaf band around it. With the right side out, make sure the bottom is lined up, and you're going to want to trim any excess away and then pin it, and you're going to want to sew the two pieces of the hood together. And then I did go back to a straight stitch for this, and you just sew with about a 1/4 inch seam allowance along the bottom, matching those two bottoms back up. And then I'm just going to trim a little bit of the excess I had from some fraying fabric. Now with the shirt panels together, you're going to open those shoulder seams, and you're going to mark the center of the back seam and line the center of the hood up. And then you're going to pin it along that opening edge and then fold that extra part back on itself over the edge. You're going to want to pin this really well because it all needs to be sewn perfectly around that edge. There are a lot of layers in the hood, so just go slow, making sure you're getting through all the complete layers and you're getting all the way to the very edge of that seam. For the sleeves, when you iron the cuffs, you're going to do wrong sides together, and you're going to iron them the long way. Then you're going to put them on the sleeve and sew the long way along the edge. This way it's going to create a little cuff for your sleeve. You're just going to do a straight stitch when you do this, and I just chain stitch them together to make it go quick. But then you're going to iron it on the outside and this makes it have like a nice finished sleeve, a little cuff, and then you're going to sew the little edges just to tack the cuff down. So just a little couple stitches right there. Now you're going to find the center of the sleeve and match it to the shoulder seam and pin each of them right sides together, and you're going to sew each arm sleeve on. Then just make sure you sew them together and the sleeves are all good. You just have to go slow around the curves. And now this is what it should look like. You're going to pin the sleeves together and then the side panels, and you're going to sew each side and then just stitch all of that. That's all you have to do for that. And then you're going to trim the inside seams. So now you're going to want to sew down that inner edge of the robe, and you're also going to want to hem the bottom of the robe. And you'll just sew all of that. Then you'll finally have your robe link or the rope to tie it around, and I like to put a safety pin at the far end of my tube, and I'm going to fold it the long way, right sides together, and I'm going to leave a middle part open so that I can flip it right side out. You're just going to sew the entire tube and leave about 1.5 inch, 2 inch opening in the center to flip it back around. And once you have it, you're going to find that safety pin, and it's going to help you move it right sides out. So that's how the safety pin helps. Then you're going to iron it flat, and if you want, you can do a top stitch around the whole thing. It kind of gives it that nice chunky robe look. This outfit had a lot of pieces to it, but I think all the details really made a difference. I absolutely love how this one all comes together. I think it's so cute, and you can change so many of the elements to make it your own. Now we have one more tutorial left, and a girl has got to have her dress. First, we are going to start with the straps. You can see that there's little points in the middle of them. That is the center where you're going to fold along each of them and then sew along that edge. And you're just going to use a straight stitch for these. When you have them sewn together, you're going to flip them around, which can be kind of tricky. Use whatever tools you have to help flip them around because they're pretty thin. And then once you have them done, iron them flat, and you're going to match them with the front of the dress. And you're actually going to sandwich them. So this is the front of the dress, and then the lining, I'm using the same fabric, and you want the points of the straps to touch each other at the bottom, and then you're going to sandwich the lining on top of it, making sure to pin everything in place. You are then going to want to sew along that top curve and make sure you get the straps in there and they haven't moved or wiggled at all. Then you are going to trim the curves and make sure you don't get bunching. Then you are going to turn the front right side out, and then you are going to take the lining and the front fabric of each back panel and sandwich the strap in between that as well, pinning all of that. Then when you sew this, it's going to be along that top curve and then down the side. This is how it looks all around, and then that down side. Now you are going to trim your corners and your curves, and you're going to want the dress to be right side out, the pieces that you have done. So flip them all right side out. You're going to want to take the front panel and then the back panel and sew those side seams together. This is a great way to hide the seam in there. So I'm just pinning that, and then you'll sew a straight stitch, and then when you're done sewing, you are going to press the seams open with your iron. I'm using the same fabric for the main fabric as the lining fabric for the waistband, and you're just going to do about a 1/4 inch on each side and iron down and stitch it. From there, you're going to line the waistband with the top of the bodice, right sides together, and sandwich the bodice in between the two waistbands. Then you're just going to sew these two onto the bodice with a straight stitch. And then you're just going to want to iron it flat. And just make sure to do it on both sides. Now for the skirt of the dress, you just want to fold in about 1/4 inch on each side the dress to finish off the edge, and then for the bottom you're going to hem it a 1/4 inch as well. You're just going to finish off all those edges with a straight stitch. Then when it comes to the bottom, you're going to find the center, and you're going to put your stitches as long as they can go. You're going to do 2 gather stitches on the top part of the skirt. This is going to help gather it around to fit along the bodice. So you're going to do 1 row and then another row right under it of a gather stitch. And then you're going to gather the middle of the top and match it to the middle of the skirt. And from there, you're going to use those threads to bunch them up on either side until it fits widthwise across. This takes a little bit of time, but you don't want to break your threads when you're trying to gather. I just move little increments at a time, and you want to keep that center mark in the center so that you don't have one side bunched up more than the other. And match it right sides together along that edge, making sure that middle mark is still center with your piece. Then you're going to pin it and sew it together. You just want to make sure that the ruffles are as equally spaced as you can get them. And I'm only doing a single layer skirt. You can always do more under this if you want to add a little extra wow factor. Off camera, I sewed the pieces together, but once you have them sewn together, you can remove those gather stitches, whether you pull on them yourself or if you use a seam ripper to remove those stitches. It's completely up to you. Whatever you want to do is up to you. If you want to leave the stitches in, that's completely fine too, especially if you used a thread that matches. Now for the back, I'm going to put right sides together and measure approximately 3 inches from the bottom, and I'm going to make a mark. I'm going to sew that bottom part together, and then the top part is where I'm going to put my Velcro. And that's all that you have left to do, is sew those right sides together and add the Velcro, and you have your own little sporty dress. I hope you guys loved this. I know it was a long one, but there were so many different crafts we did. So here's a flashback at some that we did, maybe a sneak peek at some to come. I am so thankful for you guys hanging out, and let me know which project was your favorite, because I don't know, every time I think I have a favorite, I think of another one that I love even more. So thanks so much for watching, guys.